On October 21st, 2021, Alec Baldwin was filming a Western movie entitled Rust in Bonanza Creek, New Mexico. Baldwin was rehearsing a scene with director Joel Souza and cinematographer Halyna Hutchins. Baldwin was seated in a church practicing a cross draw with a .45 caliber revolver. As Baldwin practiced pulling the weapon from the left side of his body with his right arm, the gun discharged. The bullet struck Halyna Hutchins and Joel Souza. Souza survived, but Halyna did not. An investigation into what was happening on the set revealed some shocking circumstances. Investigators say they found 6 live rounds on the set, including some in a photo with the woman in charge of gun safety, 24-year-old armorer Halyna Gutierrez. Additional live rounds were found in a box marked dummy rounds. Meanwhile, Alec Baldwin insists his finger was not on the trigger. Tonight, we take a closer look at the gun. Is it possible that it malfunctioned? And could Halyna Hutchins have been saved by emergency responders? All this as we continue our investigation into the Baldwin movie shooting. I'm Vinnie Politan. Thank you so much for joining us tonight here on Closing Arguments. This trial continues out in New Mexico. And when we talk about what was taking place, this was the filming of a movie, a Western, with a lot of guns. Most Westerns do have guns. That's the genre. The genre's been around a long, long time. So it would seem that people in Hollywood would understand and know how to film a Western without setting off live rounds. But that didn't happen here. 3 times. 3 times a live round was set off on this during the filming of this movie. 3 times. The last one taking the life of Halyna Hutchins. Now, let's talk about the movie a little bit. Alec Baldwin was not just the star of the movie, he was also executive producer. Big star, small movie. That's the way you have to look at this. All right, this isn't a major studio production with hundreds of millions of dollars being flooded into it. No, it's a smaller movie, an independent movie with an A-list superstar, Alec Baldwin. Executive producer, and of course, the star in front of the camera of this movie. And the reason that presumably people would go watch it and see it. Oh, Alec Baldwin's in this movie. Must be good. Let's go watch it. For Halyna Hutchins, the cinematographer in this one, this was a great opportunity. You're working with Alec Baldwin. So you know the movie's going to get some buzz. It's an independent movie, so it's one that Alec Baldwin must believe in to do. Probably not the biggest moneymaker, but he's invested in everything and will make money from the profits as an executive producer. But again, not one of these super blockbuster movies, but a great, great opportunity for Halyna Hutchins, so you can understand why she would want to be there. Despite the fact that these negligent discharges were taking place, why she would stay to film this movie. For her career, Hollywood's a tough place. It's a tough, tough place, tough town to make it. And for her, she saw this as this movie could be the big one for me. This could be the one that catapults me to the next level in the industry. Cost her life. So what happened with the movie? What happened to the movie Rust? Well, tonight we're going to find out. We're going to follow up and let you know everything that has taken place before the shooting, after the shooting, and what the status is of this production and who's involved in this production. We're going to get to that. But first, it was another big day inside the courtroom. Here are some of the big moments.
What was your conclusion for cause of death?
Death was caused by a gunshot wound to the chest.
And what was the manner of death?
I certified the manner of death as accident. Looking at the material that was available to me through law enforcement reports, it was apparent to me there was no obvious intent to cause death. It doesn't mean there's no negligence or so on, but it means there was no intent to cause death.
Based on the experiment that we did with this gun back in August of 2023, even if the hammer of the gun was damaged on October 21st of 2021, would the trigger have to be pulled for the gun to fire?
Two things. Yes, the trigger would have to be depressed or pulled. The hammer would have to be at the full cock position, and it can't be damaged because it would do what we saw here, and what you just saw here would not fire the gun.
If Mr. Baldwin were cross-drawing that weapon and had his finger in the trigger guard, and then he pulled it and it had it fully cocked and it slipped and let go, would that fire that weapon?
Only if he had the trigger pulled or depressed. They're similar, but I make a slight distinction between it being depressed versus pulled.
Okay, so, sir, so either way, that shooter had to either have it depressed, have his finger in the trigger, or pull that trigger for that to fire.
And have it cocked.
And have it cocked.
Fully cocked.
Fully cocked.
Yes.
You sent the gun that was being used by Mr. Baldwin to the FBI for testing, is that correct?
Yes, we did.
And prior to the testing being done with the mallet, were you notified that that testing could potentially result in damage to the gun?
Yes.
And what was the reason that you proceeded with the testing anyway?
We proceeded with the testing because Mr. Baldwin had made statements that he didn't pull the trigger, and I think his exact statement was that the gun just went off. So we needed to figure out how to disprove that theory or that statement.
I told you, another big day inside the courtroom. Let's bring in Court TV legal correspondent Kelly Craft, who's live in Santa Fe, New Mexico tonight, where the sun is setting as we speak. Kelly, great to see you. Let's start first with the victim in this case, Halyna Hutchins. Today, medical examiner and autopsy photos.
Yes, Vinnie, the autopsy photos, they were showed to the jury today. This is when the medical examiner, the chief investigator from the University of New Mexico, she was on the stand talking about the cause of death, the gunshot wound to the chest of Halyna Hutchins, and then also the manner of death, which she said was accidental. So she explained that during her testimony. And I want to mention that when these autopsy photos were being shown to the jury, the defendant in this case, Halyna Gutierrez, was really having a hard time. Throughout this trial, we've watched her, and she has remained mostly stoic at times, sometimes really interested in what's being said, sometimes appearing not so interested. But today, she visibly was distressed when the state was showing these autopsy photos of Halyna Hutchins. She had her eyes closed. At times, her head would be down. At times, she had her hands on her head. So you could tell that it was really hard for her to be watching all of the video and the testimony that was being talked about from the medical examiner and when those photos were being shown, Vinnie.
It's always a difficult moment. Now, this isn't a murder case. Accidental, involuntary manslaughter is the charge. It's about recklessness, criminal negligence. That's what it's about in this case. But still, when you see the results of that, it makes things very, very real in the courtroom. So let's talk about this body cam video from the movie set, right? Responders show up, people have cameras on, so you're seeing almost the immediate aftermath of everything.
You really did get a chance to see that, Vinnie. So the jurors have those monitors in front of them, so they can see this up close. So first responders get on scene, and it's chaos. And eventually they end up talking with the defendant, in this case, Halyna Gutierrez. And what we're going to show you are some of the comments that Halyna makes. This is going to be through a bathroom door. You can hear her talking about her career as an armorer being over, and she says, "Welcome to the worst day of my life. Let's take a listen.
I don't want to go back. Okay. I just want to get the out of here and never show my face in this industry ever again. Well, I wouldn't say that. No, I wouldn't. How long have you been working here? Just a month. Just a month? Yeah. I've just been doing this job for like 9 months now. Okay. How old are you? 24. I'm like the only female armorer in the game, and I just up my whole entire career. Have you studied armory, or did you go to classes, or how did you get into it? My dad's the best, one of the best armorers in the entire world, and he trained me, and I'm a failure.
And Vinnie, also during that footage, Hannah expresses shock that Alec Baldwin was holding that weapon. During another police interview that was played for the jurors today, you can hear her talk about how she would try to be training actors on the set, and that typically she would normally be training actors one-on-one. But then on this particular movie set, the movie set of Rust, she was having to train 3 actors at a time. She said that while she would be trying to train them, that producers would also be talking to the actors, that they would be distracted by her training, weren't really paying attention to her at all. And she said Alec Baldwin was always on his phone.
That's a problem for Alec Baldwin. It'd be interesting to see how that impacts Halyna Gutierrez, right? Because, you know, there's, and prosecutors, this is their theory, that there's 3 people involved in making all of this happen, right? Allowing this to happen on the set.
Yeah.
Halyna Gutierrez, Dave Halls, who's pleaded guilty, and Alec Baldwin, who'll be tried this summer. So something else that the jury saw today was the police interview of Halyna Gutierrez. And one thing that's striking before you get to what she's saying is just how she appears. I mean, inside the courtroom, she looks like she's one of the stars of the movie Rust. I mean, she looks very glamorous inside the courtroom. It's much different than how she appeared in the police interview, which they got to see today.
It is quite a change, and today she had on a long leather skirt, Vinnie, some boots, makeup done, hair up, looks terrific, and she's very friendly when she comes out of the courtroom, waving at us. She's said some comments to our photographer here, Peter, and also I've mentioned before, she mentioned to me that her mother loves watching court TV. But yes, quite a different image than what she had on that movie set of Rust. And even when she's doing that police interview, just it's as if it's kind of a different person. But let's listen to some of that police interview now. I want to say first, the jurors did send out a note to the judge saying that they were hopeful that they could get some closed captioning of that police interview because they were having a hard time hearing some of it. The judge denied that request, but said if any of the jurors here are having a hard time hearing things, do not be shy, raise your hand, let me know, and we can figure out how to make sure that you hear everything. But let's play some of that now.
Hold on, that might be a regular live round though. It looks pretty, that's what they were thinking, it could be a live round. No, I just think you said, and I think that's why there's protocol because of Lee, when all that happened on set too. Was there anything that stuck out of ordinary today to you? No, I mean, just the whole camera crew quit. That's all. So we were like super behind and everything. When did the camera crew quit? Yesterday. So is there a reason? I don't know. Okay. I don't think that they would be involved in that. Well.
And Vinnie, you can see that would be a logical question from one of the investigators in this case. You have the camera crew, the whole entire crew, 6 people quitting, walking off the set, and then this shooting happens. So she's trying to figure out, did someone sabotage this set, not want this movie made? And then you hear Halyna Gutierrez saying that she cannot imagine someone doing such a thing. She can't even fathom it.
Yeah, I think that would be. Now we're talking about a murder case if someone did that. But there were 2 prior negligent discharges of weapons on the set before they left. My guess is it's more likely they left because guns are being fired and there's other problems, like she said, that they're behind, so they're being rushed, etc., which all, you know, coming together creates a real problem here. Kelly Craft in New Mexico tonight. Great to see you. We will speak again tomorrow night. Thank you so much. Okay, let's talk about the movie itself, this movie Rust. What do we know about it? Let's bring in our special guest joining us in Los Angeles, California, entertainment reporter and host of Kinsey's LA Diaries on Talk TV. Kinsey Schofield is with us. Kinsey, great to see you again. Let's start with this movie. What was the movie Rust about? What was the plot here for this movie?
That's right. Hi, Vinnie. A plot that might hit too close to home today. Rust is a passion project written by Alec Baldwin and Joel Souza. Ironically, the storyline is about manslaughter. A teenage boy is sentenced to death for accidentally killing a local rancher. Alec Baldwin plays an outlaw named Harold Rust, who rides to his grandson's, the teenage boys, rides to his rescue after sentencing. So a little bizarre to discover that plot line.
Absolutely, and I didn't realize that the movie was co-written by Alec Baldwin. So I mean, this was his movie. This is really his movie. So did they ever finish it?
So Rust resumed filming at the Yellowstone Film Ranch in Montana at the end of April 2023. The film finally wrapped in May of the same year. Originally, the production had a filming schedule of just 21 days. That started in New Mexico on October 6, 2021, with a budget of between $6 and $7 million. Obviously, those are two goals or projections that production just did not meet. When they resumed filming in Montana, this set had 0 working weapons and what they referred to as enhanced safety protocols. According to Vulture, a lawyer for Rust says that the scene that was being rehearsed when Hutchins was fatally shot has been rewritten, but will remain in the film with some changes.
Wow. So So they finished, they wrapped. How long does it take out in Hollywood? You wrap a movie till the folks can see it. And do we know what type of release this movie will have?
So I did call the U.S. distributor today, and I tried to get some answers for you. I can't tell if they can't or won't give me answers on it because they perhaps are trying to distance themselves. It doesn't have a release date at this time, and it is unclear if or how the trials are affecting that release schedule.
And there was one interesting development that happened where Matthew Hutchins, Halyna's husband, widower now, is now an executive producer of this movie?
Yes, sir. Matthew Hutchins, serving in the capacity of executive producer. He said in a statement involving the conclusion of his monetary settlement, as part of that settlement, his case was dismissed. The film of Rust, which I will now executive produce, he says, will resume with all the original principal players on board. Now, he clearly seems to be endorsing the film through that statement. However, the late cinematographer's mother, father, and sister are not involved in the film and have an active lawsuit that names the production company Baldwin, Gutierrez, Reed, and more.
Wow. So I thought all the civil stuff was wrapped up, but it's not because her family's still involved there. Interesting stuff. We'll keep an eye open to see when this movie is released. And my guess is that Matthew wants it released. He's the executive producer. And we'll see how it all develops. Kinsey Schofield, great information as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, folks, when we come back, we are going to take a look at 2 important issues in this case today. One, could she have been saved? Halyna Hutchins. Could emergency workers have saved her? Did they not do the job properly at the scene to keep her alive? And we're going to take a look at the weapon and what the FBI did with the weapon, plus coming up next hour. In Athens, Georgia, the brutal murder of nursing student Laken Riley. Tonight, we are learning new details about what happened and about the accused killer. Was this crime preventable?
He did not know her at all. I think this was a crime of opportunity.
I'm the armor, or at least I was.
A
famous actor in a movie set accident that ended in tragedy.
I try and cock the gun goes off.
Now, Alec Baldwin and the film's armorer have both been charged with involuntary manslaughter.
Just because it's an accident doesn't mean that it's not criminal.
Court TV takes you inside the courtroom as Halyna Gutierrez faces a jury.
The Baldwin movie shooting trial. Live coverage weekday mornings. Only on Court TV.
Accidental discharge, its goal is essentially to determine, can I fire this firearm without pulling the trigger? That's kind of the end goal. And the way we do that is the test is designed to simulate the firearm being bumped or banged into something, just being jostled around, and seeing can those kind of interactions fire the firearm. So the way we replicate this in the laboratory is I will take the gun and actually strike it with a rawhide mallet on 6 planes. So if you picture a box sitting in front of you, the 6 planes would be the front of the box, the rear of the box, the left side, the right side, the top, and the bottom. So those are the 6 planes. So if you kind of picture the revolver and picture how those 6 planes work around that gun, I'm going to go around and strike the firearm in all 6 of those planes with a rawhide mallet. Again, trying to determine if it will actually fire without me touching the trigger. This type of testing is potentially destructive to the firearm. So just kind of generally speaking, if I'm going to do an exam that may destroy or alter the evidence permanently, I would seek out the contributor's permission to do that exam before I actually go and do it. So that is what was done in this case.
They took the mallet and they mangled this gun and the testing. And I understand the theory of this, right? But as a lawyer and a former prosecutor, I'm a little concerned here because now you've destroyed some evidence and the defense doesn't have their own independent opportunity to examine the gun. And they're going to make a big deal about it. And if there is a conviction, it becomes another thing that the appellate courts have to deal with. But like hitting it with a mallet, like Alec Baldwin told you exactly what he did with the gun. He just pulled it out like this. That's what he showed you. And he's drawing back the hammer. He's not bumping into anything. There's video of him doing the same exact thing before lunch. There's 4 witnesses who could tell you what he did. I don't know why they're hitting it with the mallet, but take a listen to more of the FBI firearms inspector talking about how they destroyed this piece of evidence.
I wanted to test this gun in all 4 positions of the hammer. So at rest, quarter cock, half cock, and fully cocked. And essentially as a result of that testing, there were only 2 times that I was able to get this firearm to fire. The first one being when the hammer was at rest on a loaded chamber. So as I previously described to you, the firing pin was sitting directly on the primer. So when I struck the hammer with the mallet, that provided enough force to detonate the primer. So again, that's a known feature of this type of firearm. The second test where this occurred was when the hammer was in the fully cocked position. Eventually, at some point, I struck the hammer with a rawhide mallet, and the hammer actually fell, and it detonated the primer. So what happened was some of the internal components of the firearm actually broke to allow that hammer to fall and fire the primed cartridge case.
In order for you to make the gun fire without pulling the trigger, when it was in the full cock position, you had to break it.
That's what I had to do in my lab. I can't account for all the other possibilities that may have existed in some hypothetical scenario, but this is the result as I tested it in my laboratory. It would not fire without pulling the trigger in the full cock setting without being broken.
All right, I get it. But to prove that, I don't know. Let me bring in my guest. Joining me from Woodlands, Texas, gun expert, former DEA, Senior Special Agent David Katz is with us. And in Tustin, California, safety expert, author of the book, Get Safe, Stuart Haskin is with us. Great to have you both here. David, and you're a lawyer too, David, I know, right? You're a lawyer too. But is this crazy that we're breaking evidence to prove that to fire a gun, you have to pull the trigger? Like, I know that's what Baldwin kept saying, my finger wasn't on the trigger, but we know kind of what he did. There's witnesses who could tell you that saw it. There's a video of him doing it prior to lunch, and there's him describing what he did. So why is the FBI taking a mallet and destroying the evidence?
That's a really good question. You would, look, we test firearms. When I was at Quantico, let's say DEA or FBI was considering authorizing a particular gun. One thing you want to make sure that the gun doesn't go bang if it gets dropped inadvertently or slammed or someone bang. You're in a tussle during an arrest. So those impact type tests have great benefit. But here, there was no impact. There was no there was absolutely no need to do that. And you're exactly right. So now the defense is going to say, so what you're telling us is we can't bring in our independent experts to show how that gun could have malfunctioned, that could have gone off. You destroyed the evidence. We are now incapable of showing the jury that you were mistaken because you broke it. So that's unfortunately where they're at now.
With a mallet, with the mallet. All right, Stuart, this case is all about safety protocols. Yeah. But the big issue for Alec Baldwin from the beginning was my finger wasn't on the trigger. My finger wasn't on the trigger. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Vinnie. Well, first of all, that set is a mess. They've had 2 negligent discharges. There was a security advisor. There was the armor. And then the fact that Alex says his finger wasn't on the trigger. If he hasn't shot a lot, that's a natural recourse. I was just working with some firearm shooting. And the first thing they do is, they always put their finger on the trigger, and that's the biggest lesson. So I kind of feel like he may not know it was on the trigger. And then what is the trigger pull on that thing? It's pretty easy, they pull, especially if adrenaline's rushing and he's working in a set. So to break the gun and see if it was an accidental discharge or negligent discharge, I don't know. I just see that there's so many issues that had happened on that set.
Now, David, in this cross draw, right? If his finger's not on the trigger and he's pulling back the hammer, the gun is built in a way that it's not gonna fire.
It cannot fire. There is no way that a hammer goes forward unless the trigger is pulled rearward, period. I mean, so what I think might have happened, Stuart's exactly correct. You have to train people to keep their finger out of the trigger guard. So what I think, and this is just pure speculation, he reaches in, takes the pistol, the finger's on the trigger with pressure. He comes out, he points the pistol, and he cocks the hammer, and maybe it slips. Or maybe he thinks it's gonna lock back the way, I'm assuming that's part of that would have been the scene, lock the hammer back and then threaten whoever you point. I don't know what the actual acting entails. But if he had pulled the hammer back with pressure on that trigger, now it's going to go forward, it's going to strike the round, and tragedy results.
All right, Stuart, how would you rank all of the safety protocols that seemingly were violated here? A live round in the weapon, an actor with his finger on the trigger, pointing it at someone in the room, and perhaps the lack of additional training.
Yep.
And I'll give you one more, which is not checking all the rounds prior to handing them to Alec Baldwin.
Yeah, I mean, as David knows, every weapon is a hot weapon. There's no such thing as a cold weapon. Once you have that in your hand, and Alec, maybe because he's executive producer, he grabbed something, I'm not sure who handed him the weapon without checking it. And it's tough. I know David trains actors as well to kind of check every weapon that you pick up, and that's what you have to do. So their safety protocols were, like, I got to give them maybe an 8% out of 100. I don't know, because I worked on many B movies and everything. The one priority was the weapons and the electrical and different things that are dangerous. So everyone on that was on the same page. Things were double checked. Armor checks it. They're locked up, carried to the actors, double checks it again. The actors even got in once they were trained, they look at it as well. But you can't expect the actor. So Alec Baldwin, as the actor, he may not have the skill set, but as the executive producer, he's got to be aware of this stuff. This is his liability. And that's the thing that you saw. It was a mess. The crew what I read, one of the crews left 2 days before, then they brought in this armor just a couple days before.
Halyna Gutierrez testified today that 6 of them left. They just left the day before.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the writing was on the wall here. Unbelievable.
True chaos on that set for sure. And
Absolutely.
It's a shame. And then, you know, it's just a sad one. No matter what, a life was lost, and they're still going to pay with that just.
And incredibly preventable on so many levels if just one person had done what they were supposed to do. David Katz, Stuart Haskin, appreciate your time tonight. Thanks so much, guys.
Hey, thank you, Vinnie. Thanks, David. Bye-bye.
All right, folks, when we come back, some interesting testimony from the medical examiner talking about what emergency responders did and could they have saved Halyna's life.
What was your conclusion for cause of death?
Death was caused by a gunshot wound to the chest.
And what was the manner of death?
I certified the manner of death as accident.
And can you explain why you classified it as an accident?
Yes. I classified the manner of death as accident. Well, let me back up to go to a homicide is classified as a volitional act caused by another to cause fear, harm, or death. Intent is not always needed. It is a common element, but is not always needed. Conversely, for an accident to be applicable, what must not be present is an intent to cause fear, harm, or death. Looking at the material that was available to me through law enforcement reports, it was apparent to me there was no obvious intent to cause death. It doesn't mean there's no negligence or so on, but it means there was no intent to cause death. Additionally, there are medical examiners across this country that would have certified the manner of death in this case as homicide. However, reviewing the material that was applicable to me, it is clear that there was a belief on the set that the firearm was not loaded with live ammunition.
Interesting. Homicide versus accidental. It's kind of both. It's like an accidental homicide. Homicide, death in the hands of another, right? I mean, someone had a gun and fired the gun, but did it accidentally. All right, I want you to take a listen to some of the cross-examination of the chief medical investigator, because something else came up during the cross-examination that I don't think any of us knew or even considered in this case, and it could be an issue. Take a listen.
During your findings, you did a CT scan before your external examination, correct?
Yes.
Did you find evidence of prior medical intervention from Ms. Hutchins?
Yes.
And what was that evidence of medical intervention?
She had been intubated. The intubation was actually in the wrong place. It was in the esophagus. It was removed when she arrived at the hospital, but she was also re-intubated into her esophagus and not into the airway. She had also had surgical intervention. So they had opened up the chest cavities on both sides due to the presence of a gunshot wound. They had also opened up the protective covering surrounding the heart to try to do what they call manual cardiac massage to restart the heart. It's my understanding that she was pulseless upon arrival and non-responsive and not breathing.
You said that she had an intubation, then another intubation. Is that right?
Yes.
And they were both in the esophagus?
Yes.
Now, an esophageal intubation can be a dangerous situation, correct?
It's an ineffective way to respirate someone or to establish air.
And in fact, can that potentially cause an anoxic situation, lack of oxygen to the brain?
Well, the injury itself is what causes the anoxic situation, but the intubation into the esophagus isn't giving adequate airway establishment.
So the esophageal intubation, do you know who performed that? Do you know who did that?
I do not.
The CPR efforts you observed, do you know who performed those?
Not off the top of my head, no. I would have to review the medical records.
Based on everything that you saw as a medical doctor, had this not taken an hour and a half, had Ms. Hutchins received more timely medical intervention, could she have possibly survived these wounds?
That's difficult for me to answer that question because I'm not a doctor who treats gunshot wounds in the chest. And I have a very skewed view regarding the lethality of gunshot wounds. So that's outside my purview.
When you were interviewed, didn't you say she possibly could have survived?
Potentially, but I'm not the best person to ask for that question because I don't treat patients.
Okay, but you previously had said that. You acknowledge that. Okay.
Wow. Could she have been saved? Joining us in Barrington, Rhode Island, board-certified forensic pathologist Dr. Priya Banerjee, and in New Mexico tonight, I never know how to say the name of the town. I'm sorry, Gary. Gary Mitchell is with us.
That's all right.
All right. Great to have you as well. Doctor, let me begin with you. What was just described there with this intubation, do you think, based upon what we were hearing here, that it had to be, that was done twice, that perhaps if it was done correctly, she would have been saved or she could have survived this?
I think that's very difficult because even if the breathing tube was in the right place, so this is the endotracheal tube, the intubation tube that they're talking about, she's still actively bleeding from her injuries, right? And so that total blood loss is what's going to deplete her brain of oxygen. So it seems like, I mean, theoretically, I think she could have helped. I was shocked that it took an hour and a half or whatnot to the resuscitation, but I still think the severity of her injuries would make it a lot less likely. I'm just like Dr. Gerald, though. I'm not an ER doc. You know, trauma surgeons are amazing, so who knows, right? Medicine advances. I also have a skewed vision of how lethal gunshot wounds are, because that's what we get. It just seems like the injuries themselves were very significant.
And I want to follow up on that time again. That time is something the defense was really kind of zeroing in on. If they have an expert who comes and said that time could have cut in half or a third, or it could have been done in 20 minutes, would that potentially make a big difference here?
Well, you have to remember it's only 2 to 3 minutes of a lack of oxygen to the brain that makes irreversible brain damage. So the rest of her body could still work, but that lack of oxygen to the brain would be devastating. And so, you know, how narrow can we get that window would be really critical to hear from a person who's an expert in the field. Again, my general belief would be that it would be difficult to save her. But again, this is way outside my purview. I'm there, just like Dr. Gerald, to document the injuries and interpret what caused her death.
All right, Gary Mitchell, let me ask you legally now. Does this become an issue for the defense here and potentially for the defense of Alec Baldwin when he goes to trial, the way Halyna was treated by emergency workers at the scene?
Oh, you bet it does. It's a huge issue. And an hour and a half, keep in mind those jurors that are hearing this case know their community, know how quickly it takes to get from that area where this occurred to 2 excellent hospitals where you get excellent trauma help. So this idea of an hour and a half is a real issue. And then the second issue, lay jurors, think that if you commit some type of medical malpractice that doesn't leave the patient in a good position for a trauma surgeon to save them, that's a major impact on those jurors. So look at it as what jurors are thinking.
Absolutely. Now, how about one other issue, an accident versus homicide in this case.
Yeah.
Is that going to make a difference, Gary, in front of this jury hearing that word accident? I see it as kind of like an accidental homicide myself.
Well, I do too, and that surprised me because the Office of the Medical Investigator in New Mexico classically qualifies any death of a human being by another human being as a homicide. So to get an accident was a real break for the defense. And now the defendant was going to get a jury instruction in which he's going to be able to argue on her behalf. This has to be a willful disregard of the rights or safety of another. And then with everything, his best argument is everything that could go wrong out there went wrong. But nobody was at fault, nobody intended anything, and nobody acted willfully. I suspect we're going to hear those very words.
Wow. All right. That's why we bring him in, folks. Gary Mitchell, great to see you. Dr. Priya Banerjee, appreciate your time tonight as well.